Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday Change Leadership episode this week with Rayyan Karim. Hey, Rayyan, welcome back.
Hey, Vasco. Thanks for having me.
So we've been talking about change already since Monday because, at the end, that's all we do. We work with change. Sometimes our own need to change, and other times other people, other teams, and even other organizations need to change. So we want to focus on that process, the change process that we are so often part of. Rayyan, tell us a story of one of those processes that you were involved with, and then walk us through, how it started, how it went, and how it ended. But also, as you go through that story, highlight for us the tips, the tricks, the techniques, and the tools you learned about back then that you still use today.
Cool. So I've been fortunate enough to see many different kind of large-scale change environments now. Some in banking at Lloyds Bank, also in a startup or scale-up environment in Clearbank. Also then with IBM, many of their different partners I work with. I've worked with BP as an energy company, but also in primary schools, colleges, and sixth forms, right? What I've learned is that if they're to be successful, they all follow the same steps. And fortunately for me, I saw those first steps in action when I was first at Lloyds Bank. So, I first had a team of 8, then 30, then 70, and then eventually I had a team of 150. So the example I'll give you is of that team of 150 in retail transformation, banking retail transformation. How were they successful? They were successful in their method of change because it was based off previous organizational experimentation. The method had been proven to work across the bank in various different areas before we adopted it. When we adopted it, we knew everyone was going to be fresh to agility. So we knew there needed to be real hands-on immersive sessions focused on their real work. And instead of doing training for training's sake, we made sure every single bit of training was just in time training. So it was almost
what do you mean by that? Walk us through that concept of just-in-time training.
So, for example, when you begin, we need to know what our measures are going to be, right? Why are we all here? What's our goals? How are we going to measure that? So we do an OKR framework, but we would first train the OKR framework and then we'd apply it straight away to the context of what we're trying to achieve. And we did this in scaled sessions. So everyone who was going to be a part of that team at the beginning, it grew to 150. It began with about 50. That those 50 people were included in designing those OKRs, understanding them conceptually, and then applying them. So they had a really good understanding before they even began what an OKR is, how to define it, how to apply it to the program. And if you continue to pull that thread, that's the way we continue to run things. So before we went and did a study of the system, because we applied systems thinking first of all, then we leveraged design thinking, and then we moved more towards agility, as you might refer to it. So the first step was systems thinking, and this was mostly about what's the flow of demand and how do we service that flow of demand through the organization. Again, we were looking at a credit control contact center, which ran the majority of the cases of financial exclusion. So people who had bank accounts that were frequently below the balance, or sometimes above, but frequently below, or they were getting close to being what our data told us to be, that they would be in financial difficulty soon. And we wanted to serve those people in a greater way, and it was more about their well-being. So we were looking at this problem to solve, and by looking at systems thinking conceptually and how to do demand mapping conceptually in a safe-to-fail environment unrelated to the work, it then helps people apply that directly to their real work, right? So again, what some companies might have done in the past is do your one method training where you do the OKRs, the systems design, then you go and do your service design or your empathy mapping, and you look at your customer journeys, and then you break that down into a backlog, and then you start doing your Scrum events, right? They might have done that all in one session, unrelated to the work, and then they expect teams of people to now get it and be able to apply it. And what we learned as an organization, and therefore me as being part of the process of that evolution, was that's not effective. Right? We need to give it to people in bite-sized bits at the moment that they need it. So just like you'd have just-in-time inventory management or just-in-time delivery, just-in-time training was what we lent towards. So it's just the right amount of new concept mapped together with exactly what we needed to do right now. And they were going to do it right now as well. And we continued that method, right? So OKRs, systems thinking as a concept, and then demand mapping, and then service design or design thinking as a concept, and then applying that, empathy maps, customer journeys, the as is, the to be, including the incubation and the new thoughts. You need to bring the outside in, and you need to make sure you can express the inside outwardly. And then from there, we break that into a backlog. So it's about vertical slices of value, making sure that we've got an MVP first approach, and that we can take quite an ambitious backlog into a very fast validation process, so that we can test which ideas are really going to move the needle on the customer's experience.
One of the aspects that is interesting for me is how you organize to find out what was the need for training, right? Like you said, deliver training in bite-sized chunks at the time that is needed. But it isn't obvious that those needs are going to be systematically and deliberately surfaced all the time. So how did you guys organize to surface that need from the teams and the people around you for training and support?
Well, actually, we knew that they were all going to be brand new to agility, right? We knew that it was a brand new lab that we were setting up. It was all brand new. So we had the gift of saying, okay, if this is brand new, what's the best possible way that we could do this? Now, we had a different complication later when we were scaling up, because obviously we can't stop to bring 100 new people into that same experience. We've got to try and roll them in while the rest of the lab is functioning. And a lot of our time's already been taken up. So maybe this is an example that will kind of talk more to your question and help the people that are listening. What we put together was a roadshow, right? So we put together 15-minute, very quick, very interactive, bite-sized trainings. And we'd go there for an hour. We had an agility session. We had a systems thinking session. We had a service design session, as we were calling it. And we had a leadership session. So we all designed them together. So we knew what was in each other's 15-minute interactive workshop. And at the end of those workshops, we managed to send like a survey out so that everyone who participated saying what would be useful for you, right? And then from there, we engaged a learning backlog. And then we just organized around that learning backlog as a lab, invited everyone, whether they'd been through that initial phase or not. Everyone was invited, and we found a way to do that in person, hybrid, you would call it now, right? This is before hybrid was a word, right? But we found a way to do it in the room for those that were in the location that the trainer was in, and also then to be enjoyed as an experience online for those that were not able to make it to that location.
That's actually a concept that is intriguing for me. So obviously in 15 minutes, you can't teach systems thinking to anyone because it actually takes a lifetime sometimes to learn what systems thinking is. So it's really interesting for me to think about how did you design that? Because like none of these concepts, Scrum is easy to teach even in a couple of minutes, but of course, teaching and answering questions and practicing and all of that, it takes a lot longer. So how did you, what was the process, or maybe like the sparring or the iterative process that you used in order to find what should be in those 15 minutes for each of these topics?
Fortunately, we'd spent the last 6 months working with people to understand these concepts, even the ones that had gone through that, the first 50 that went through that initial process. We had to revisit, some of the stuff with them. So we got very good at explaining things concisely, just getting to the point, right? For me, when I look at systems thinking, there's those 4 key aspects of it, right, which we briefly discussed when we were talking about the book. On Tuesday, we discussed the book that I would recommend. So that book, again, for me, it's in 4 sections. So for systems thinking, I shouldn't take me more than a minute or less to explain those 4 sections. it shouldn't take a small group, because we would have had small groups of maybe, I think it was maybe 30, relatively small groups of 30 people coming in and out sort of every 15 minutes. It didn't take us too long for me to explain what it meant, and then just to field questions like, how does that relate to our environment? And trying to get that group of people to have a conversation amongst themselves and gain a shared understanding of what I might have started the conversation about. So the key was to have lots of interaction, to make it something that they're learning by themselves exploring as a room. So less about having the sage at the front of the stage telling you exactly how it all works, and more about starting a dialogue, creating curiosity, and seeing how we can get the room to color in the gaps in the details, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that first-hand experience is extremely critical. And you had all of the others that had already gone through the deeper or more in-depth training and were already using the concepts, which is a great support structure for the new people coming in. Rayyan, that was a great story of change. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you, no problem.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.